Good morning. Beautiful morning here in Michigan, and we're going to read chapter 6 of A Drop of Mercy. You'd think a person will get used to the smell of bread. Not Heinrich. He loved bread, his mother's especially, and the smell of it baking all day drove him to distraction. Bread while he milked the cow. Bread while he scutched the flax. Bread while he read and whittled and slept. He didn't mind too much, though, as long as he got to eat the stuff. And with the deal his father had worked out with Captain Crawley, Heinrich could get his fill for the first time in months. He stepped out of the kitchen, juggling a fresh loaf and singing. And so today we ask you, Lord, supply the bread we hunger for, that manna from on high, the wisdom from your God-breathed word that only you supply. That's number 33 in the Ausbund he was singing. Giving one great kick at the golden leaves accumulating beneath the apple trees, he turned toward the back of the yard. "Look quick," he yelled, tossing the loaf to Nat as he rounded the corner of the spring house. Nat caught the loaf in his right hand and quickly transferred it to his left. "Whew, that's hot." "Fresh from the hearth." "Thanks, but I really ought to wait for the rations to come through." "This one's from Mam's share." Nat took a deep whiff. "Well, that's another matter entirely. Let me run it back while it's hot," he said, turning back toward the encampment. "The chaps'll award me a Medal of Honor." Heinrich couldn't help smiling as he headed back to the kitchen. Who would have thought a soldier could be such a pleasant fellow? Boom! Heinrich jumped out of bed. Pop, pop, crack. That was musket fire. He hurried to the window and threw back the shutters. A lot of good that did. The night was as black as tar. What hour was it? He couldn't tell. More shots rang through the night. The glass in his windows buzzed at the report. Boom! He saw the flash less than a second later. They were out by the woods. Were Nat and his men moving? He couldn't see. Heinrich ran out to the hallway. His father was already there, opening the door to the back balcony. They stepped out and peered into the darkness together. A shout erupted beyond the meadow. "Present arms! Fire!" A volley of shots rang out a second later. "This is no skirmish," Dottie said. "Do you think the militia are attacking the encampments?" Mom asked from the dark hallway. Heinrich supposed Klaus was by her side, though he made no sound. "That's not the militia. Too many guns. Many of them rifles, if I'm any guess." "The Continentals?" she whispered. "Yes." They stood together listening, trying to use their ears to paint a picture of what their eyes could not see. Muffled sounds of movement in the garden told them Nat's men were most certainly up. The soldiers in the neighboring yards were moving too, or so it sounded. More guns were firing now, closer, in the fields. At intervals, a cluster would go off together and shine out as through a haze. Ah, Heinrich realized, that's why it's so dark. No moon, and foggy too. Crack, crack, pop. There, Nat's men mustering in the pasture with troops from neighboring yards. That irksome fog. They were gone again. A faint hint of light seemed to be growing over the woods beyond the fighting. Sunrise? Or was something on fire? Not red enough for flames. It must be the sun. And she moved fast that time of day. Heinrich stirred nervously. They would be visible here on the balcony soon. Dottie had noticed too. "Nellie," he said, "take Klaus and go quickly around to the cellar. Take a candlestick, but don't light it unless you absolutely must. Pull the door tight and jam it. Don't open it until Heinrich or I come to you." Klaus whined, "But I want to." "Now." "Yes, Daddy." He turned to Heinrich. "It would be no shame for you to go with them, but you may be useful here." He had to yell to be heard over the incessant roar of the musketry. Heinrich stood taller. "I'll stay." "Good. I want you to go down and fill as many skins as you can with cider. There will be more than a few men with their life's blood draining out before this is over. I will gather what bandages I can and meet you at the top of the staircase." They met a few minutes later and divided the supplies. "Listen," Dottie said. "We will watch from separate ends of the house. I'll take the front. Keep behind the shutters unless you see someone wounded. No further than the garden, though. When the fighting clears off, tend to him as quickly as you can, then return to your watch. Give small sips only, if he's lightly wounded. More if he's bleeding out upon the ground." "I will." "It will be light soon, so stay hidden. May the good God watch over you." "And over you, Dottie." Heinrich watched as the distant battle in the growing light for perhaps an hour, till something ignited the stubble in the outer fields like kindling, transforming the already surreal scene into a vision of Gehenna. And the screams, human screams, terrible, terrible, echoing through the mist and piercing to the core of Heinrich's soul. Occasionally the haze would dissipate enough for Heinrich to see the screaming men. Many lay on the ground, rolling slowly back and forth. Others were perfectly still. But most ran, like hornets in the sun, or like rabbits when the fox catches sight of them, until they caught up with one another, and then Heinrich closed his eyes and shuddered. Then he remembered why he was there, to watch, and he opened his eyes. As he scanned the fog closer to the house, he heard a shout. He stared into the mist. There it came again. Was that Nat? No, it couldn't be. The fog shifted. It was Nat. There, running toward the garden, a Continental soldier at his heels. The man had murder on his face, and he was shouting, "Paoli! Remember Paoli!" Time froze. Heinrich wanted to turn away, to not have to watch, but he couldn't. The man with vengeance in his eyes was almost upon Nat, his bayonet stretching ever closer as he ran. "Faster, Nat, he's right behind you!" Then Heinrich screamed. 3 stabs and it was all over. All over. Nat hadn't even screamed. Heinrich couldn't stop shaking. He stared down upon the patio where his friend lay silent. Not a moan, nothing. And then, as he stared, Nat moved. Heinrich rushed down the stairs and out into the yard. "Nat, you all right?" Nat opened his eyes, confused. Blood pooled beneath him. "How are you doing?" Heinrich whispered, as if death itself might overhear him and pounce. Nat stared at the tree at the edge of the garden. "Heinrich, so nice of you to come." "I need to take a look at these wounds." Heinrich gently loosened Nat's jacket and arm. I need to take a look at these wounds. Heinrich gently loosened Nat's jacket and shirts. One wound bled freely. The other seeped a frothy pink foam. Heinrich tore out the linen bandages his father had placed in his bag and pressed a tight wad against both wounds. He tied them around the chest as best he could with strips of cloth and settled Nat upon his back where the pressure from his own weight might slow the bleeding. 'Twas a bayonet had pierced his friend's back, and such wounds weren't known to heal. "How's that?" Heinrich asked. "Nice, very nice." Nat's voice was weak, almost bubbly, like the wound upon his back. "I tried to yell," Heinrich said in apology, "but he came too fast." "Not your fault, old chap." Nat coughed and stared off into the tree again. "It's different than I thought it would be. Quieter." Heinrich bit his trembling lip and tried to hold back his tears. "Yes." "I wonder if your mother will bake today," Nat said softly. "Lovely bread." "Yes." "Don't suppose you could give me a sip of something? I'm dreadfully thirsty, you know." He coughed again. It was gurglier this time. Heinrich suddenly remembered his skin of cider. He lifted Nat's head and held the skin to his lips. "Ah, you will thank her for me. Your mother?" Heinrich cried openly now. Nat didn't. "I will." Lovely cider. His speech was slower now, almost sleepy. "It's not at all what I thought it would be like." Nat closed his eyes. "Don't sleep here, Nat." Heinrich could hear the panic in his voice. "Let's get you into the house. It's warmer there." Heinrich lifted Nat's shoulders, but his head softly rolled to the side. "Nat, wake up! Nat, you can't sleep out here. Wake up and come inside." But Nat didn't respond. Heinrich bent over his friend's face and listened. Not even a gurgle. He laid Nat's head gently on the ground and sobbed. The fog was melting when at last Heinrich tore himself from Nat's lifeless body. The sounds of battle had moved to the north. He looked around. Patches of stubble still burned in the fields. Bodies littered the countryside, some still moving. Screams had sunk to moans. Heinrich heard groaning in the camp beyond the spring house. One of Nat's men must be injured. With a renewed sense of purpose, he grabbed the remaining bandages and cider skin and ran to see who was there. It was a Continental soldier. He lay on his back, holding his belly, bawling like a cow long past milking time. Heinrich hurried to the man's side, but stopped cold when he saw his face, black from gunpowder. The tracks of sweat and tears stood out cleanly. Heinrich could never forget that face. It was the face of the murdering beast who had stabbed Nat in the back. "Thirsty," the man gasped. "Please, so thirsty." Heinrich glared at the soldier, pity draining from his heart the longer he stared. "You killed a good man," he said at last. The soldier looked at him uncomprehendingly. "Have mercy, sir, I'm so thirsty." "Is this what you want?" Heinrich asked, holding up his cider skin. The soldier's face lit up with gratefulness. "Aye, bless you for it." Heinrich spat. "Not even a drop. Here's your mercy." He turned the skin upside down and squeezed every last drop of cider upon the ground before the soldier's despondent eyes. He dropped the empty skin into a puddle and scowled. "There's your paoli." He threw the bandages atop the pile and staggered out to the smoldering field. What do you think about Heinrich's response? I want you to think about that for a little while. This is a tough chapter, toughest chapter in the book. It deals with some of the real things that happen in war. War isn't just a storybook thing. War is where men hurt each other and get angry and get hateful and do very nasty things and die. And Heinrich was confronted with that in his backyard, but he didn't deal with it very well. So think for a little while about Heinrich's response, and in the rest of the book, we're going to see how Heinrich deals with what has happened to him, what he's seen, what he's done. Okay, what he's done. And don't worry, the book doesn't stay like this. It's a good book, and it ends up with a good ending. Have a good week. Bye.